Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're here at The Roost in VR chat. My name is Christian Metaxas. I'm here with Michael Jorgensen.
Hi, everyone.
And we're here to talk about the Online Learning Digital Fluency Fellowships project, of which Mr. Jorgensen here is one of our fellows here out of Trent University. The program is a multi-institutional gathering of academics and scholars, and the goal of the talks, as I understand it, is to find ways to humanize online learning. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And a lot of the discussions were designed in a way to sort of promote reflection and to chat with fellow educators in post-secondary institutions across Ontario.
It's part of one of the many VLS projects, and we had the idea to have this conversation in VR chat because we felt that it kind of spoke the ideas of learning, unlearning, experimenting, and just freeing ourselves from the burden of expectation a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's what, a lot of these discussions sort of revolved around is vulnerability and sort of unlearning what expectations we have of ourselves and the institution has sort of around education, how we teach, both in physical space and in a digital space such like this. So a little bit of context for my background too. I'm a part-time instructor in the Department of Psychology at Trent University. And although last semester I was teaching in person, we've now transitioned back to online, but temporarily, but potentially not. And so there's all sorts of uncertainty around that. And I think that's perfect to what these discussions last semester were around, is being comfortable with that uncertainty. And that's sort of the value that the online sort of digital space, I suppose, provides.
It's kind of in some ways, it's a fascinating, not problem, but it's such a fascinating notion that even though we all exist kind of in the same community in varying degrees, the difference in the forms of vulnerability can change drastically.
Yeah, and so vulnerability means different things to different people, and that impacts the way they engage in something like education. And it certainly would have an impact on their pedagogical approach, say. So I guess after stepping back and having a bit of time to think about what vulnerability is, looking at this, falling back, I suppose, with what I'm comfortable with, which is probably counterintuitive to this exercise in some regards, vulnerability is a form of risk taking. And when we look at motivations to engage in risk taking, like that is being vulnerable, is to be the willingness to engage in something that potentially has an uncertain outcome. I think our common understanding of expertise is, a wealth of experience in a particular area. And so to me, that kind of says, if you're an expert in doing something, that's that particular way, but that doesn't really account for the idea that we need to be adaptable. We need to be changing, even over the course of a semester, over the course of a year, over the course of a week, how we engage with students and how they come to access and, I guess, engage with our courses. So something like, now we're online temporarily, that's something that you need to adapt to. But just because an individual has experience in teaching 2-hour lecture, 1-hour seminar, biweekly seminar sort of format, now that we're online, okay, so is that synchronous? Is that asynchronous? Is there an opportunity for students to feel like they actually belong in that space, that they're a part of the course, or are they just another, blank screen on a Zoom call? Mm-hmm. Are you giving them an opportunity to inform or tell you what they want? So that's something I think is really important. And so in academia, there's this push to be seen as an expert. And I think an expert in a content area, sure, but that doesn't mean you have to be an expert in everything. And sometimes the smartest thing you can say is that you don't know something. And that's a really big hurdle for some, and myself as well, to overcome, especially, and I'll give my own experience here, to admit that, maybe I'm not competent in something as it relates to presenting. Say I'm not familiar with Blackboard as I'd like to be, or I had a bad lecture and nobody really engaged with my questions online, in person, or whatever. or whatever that looks like, or my discussion boards aren't getting the types of responses or engagement or sort of critical thinking that I'd want. This whole point is to say, I don't know the best way to do this and I need to adjust. And that's the vulnerability. That's the unlearning. It's, hey, this isn't working. Let's fix it. There's a lot to sort of unpack there, but this idea of being vulnerable with expertise in particular is that maybe the expert understanding is recognizing when things have to change. And that doesn't mean that you're not a good educator. That just means the situation changed, and that's okay. One of the things that really stood out for me, getting back to the fellowship and some of these conversations, one of the things that stood out to me so much was an experience just after one of them. We'd all kind of, I believe, came back. We'd all sort of shared little bits on vulnerability and what that meant, and sort of where we had progressed or where we'd gotten through the fellowship. And then the facilitator said something along the lines of, oh, and by the way, like, this is how we're going to use this. Is everyone familiar with that? And after talking extensively for about 30 minutes about how we're all, students should be vulnerable. I'm going to be vulnerable. We're going to try new things. We're going to step out of our comfort zone. We're going to take these risks. Not a single person spoke up to say, Mr. Facilitator, I'm not really sure what you're talking about here. It was just in that moment, I kind of had a funny, imagine like a third person view looking in being like, we're not doing the thing we just said we were going to do. And I think that speaks to maybe in that context, how that was an environment not created by us, or something that perhaps we didn't feel comfortable in taking those risks, whatever the reason is there. But if all of the faculty, the individuals who are teaching the students don't express this in a situation where I would think all the stars are aligning and you should be pretty comfortable to say, hey, I actually don't know this. Can we really expect students to engage in that sort of vulnerability or risk taking as well? Where they might not be in a situation where all the stars don't align, where, they're stressed because they have to work through a pandemic. Their degree is online, but it's in person, but now it's online, but now it's in person. But, we'll see next week at this press conference. So it was just an interesting sort of moment for me there, which I think is the biggest thing that I've been reflecting on. And as we talked about before, and how this connects to this idea of unlearning and breaking down what our assumptions are of how people learn and how individuals engage in this space, this digital space. I think in a lot of ways it starts by asking them and, bringing them in as part of that conversation and trying to understand, trying to express that empathy or understand their situations as part of that. If we bring this all back to the purpose of this fellowship, it's humanizing online learning. And I think the human elements of that is that people make mistakes, and we should be okay doing that. We ask that of our students. We ask that of them to say, hey, it's okay to get something wrong. And sort of the same way as an educator, there's these cookie cutter approaches to doing things. And I don't think we should be fixating on that and recognizing that we might make mistakes along the way. But that's figuring out what this digital space is. And that's, in my opinion, the humanizing element of it. And just being open to that is a big part of it. To humanize learning is to really express that sort of genuine empathy for each other, whether that's instructor to instructor or instructor to student or student to student, whatever that looks like, whatever that social interaction is. Like you said, people have a really good sense of the pulse of being genuine, even in an online space where that might be a little bit more difficult. I think I get the sense that students would respond well if you're at least trying.